What if I told you King Charles just erased his own son from royal history with one signature? In a move no one saw coming, King Charles has officially removed Prince Harry from the line of succession, stripping him of all royal inheritance rights and declaring him a threat to the crown's future. Citing irreparable damage, the decision was backed by a royal decree and has already triggered global outrage, media explosions, and fierce division inside the royal family. But what really led to this unprecedented act? Who pushed Charles to finally act? And is this just the beginning of a deeper royal purge? What we uncovered behind palace walls may shock you. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. He didn't scream. He didn't rage. He didn't call a press conference or storm out of Buckingham Palace with a decree in his hand. No. When King Charles finally made the decision to remove his own son, Prince Harry, from the line of succession, he did it the only way a monarch can, with a document, a seal, and silence. It was a decision years in the making. Decades, some would argue. And when it arrived, it wasn't announced with fanfare. There was no ceremony, no televised address. Just a quiet but seismic change in the royal ledger. One name gone. One line erased. Prince Harry, Duke of Sussex, once the boy who walked behind his mother's coffin as the world wept, had now been officially removed from the future of the crown. Not pushed aside by public opinion, not edged out by media, but written out by his own father. The royal family has always prided itself on continuity. It thrives on the illusion of stability, order, and legacy. It survives chaos by absorbing loss, rebellion, betrayal until now. Until Charles. Until this. The implications of this decision are nothing short of revolutionary. It is not merely symbolic. This is the first time in modern British history that a reigning monarch has formally removed a direct heir from the line of succession without the trigger of death, abdication, or criminal offense. And what's more, it was not framed as a necessity for reform or a decision of constitutional logistics. It was a judgment of character. A king declaring his own son unfit to inherit the throne, not because of politics, but because of trust. The official language was clinical, yet cutting. Irreparable damage to the crown. That phrase has already etched itself into royal history. With just 5 words, King Charles made it clear this wasn't about punishment. It was about preservation. The institution had been tested, pushed to the brink by controversy, scandal, and rebellion. And in Charles's view, it was Harry who struck the final blow. So what happened? How did the once beloved spare end up removed from a legacy his birthright once guaranteed? Was this retribution? Or was it the final act in a saga that had spiraled beyond reconciliation? To understand the shock and weight of this moment, we have to go back, before Netflix, before Oprah, before the book releases, the lawsuits, the documentaries, and the tabloid wars. We have to remember who Harry was before he became the center of a storm that divided the royal family and the world watching them. He was the soldier prince, the cheeky one, the boy who danced with orphans in Lesotho, who built a name in uniform, not under a crown. He was raw, emotional, flawed, but forgivable. Britain loved Harry for his human edge. He reminded the public that royals could bleed, could falter, could laugh a little too loudly. And then came Meghan. The arrival of Meghan Markle was heralded as a modern turning point for the monarchy. American, biracial, successful in her own right. It was the royal family's answer to a new era. But it didn't take long for the honeymoon to sour. Fractures emerged fast and deep. Headlines turned ugly. Staff resigned. Tensions escalated. The Sussexes accused the palace of abandonment, racism, and cruelty. The palace, in turn, tried to say nothing, tried to endure. But every silence was filled with a headline, a claim, an accusation. When Harry and Meghan stepped back from royal duties in 2020, it was already an earthquake. But the monarchy held firm, at least publicly. They were given space. The Queen's statement acknowledged their desire for a more independent life. Titles were kept. Lineage was respected. The door was left ajar. But that door is now shut. Locked. Sealed. With this royal decree, King Charles has done what his mother never did. He has drawn a line in the sand, one that even blood cannot cross. The monarchy, always a family business, has become a political machine, and Harry has become incompatible with its function. Make no mistake, this isn't just a story about family tension. This is about constitutional order. The British line of succession is not a metaphor. It is law. To To be in that line is to hold potential political authority, however ceremonial in practice. To be removed from it, therefore, is not just exile. It is legal erasure. Charles's decision was backed by formal instruments of the crown. While such a decree doesn't require Parliament's approval, it can trigger wider constitutional conversation. And it has. Within hours of the news breaking, legal experts, political commentators, and royal historians began weighing in on the consequences. Could this open the floodgates for further reform? Could more royals be stripped? Would this become a precedent? And then, there was the emotional shockwave. Inside the palace, sources say the reaction was mixed. Some breathed a sigh of relief. Finally, an end to the drama. Others were stunned by the finality of it all. But it was Harry's reaction, or lack thereof, that turned heads. According to several insiders, the Duke of Sussex was blindsided. He had not been informed directly. No warning, no message, just the announcement, one that reached him in the same way it reached the rest of the world. He was silent, at least publicly. Not even his team issued a formal response in the first 48 hours. Some speculated he was in shock. Others believed he was strategizing a counterstrike. But behind the scenes, friends of Harry reportedly described him as devastated. One close associate said, "He always believed his father would never go this far. He never thought Charles would cross this line. But Charles did. And that changes everything." In many ways, this wasn't just about Harry. It was about the monarchy drawing boundaries in an age where boundaries are easily blurred. Where royals post Instagram photos, but also sue the press. Where personal memoirs collide with state protocol. Where emotion meets duty, and duty still wins. And now, with this decree, King Charles has thrown down the gauntlet. His reign, barely begun, is already marked by rupture. Some see it as bold, others, vindictive. But no one sees it as insignificant. In the coming chapters of this unfolding royal drama, questions will emerge. Can this decision be reversed? What does it mean for Harry's children? Will Meghan respond directly? And what does this say about the future of a monarchy trying to modernize without fracturing? This video will take you through all of it. You'll learn exactly how the decree was issued, who signed it, who approved it, and how it was legally enforced. You'll hear what insiders are saying about the true reasons behind it. You'll discover how the public, both in Britain and across the Commonwealth, is reacting. And perhaps most critically, we'll explore what happens next. Because this is not just a scandal. This is a story of power, legacy, betrayal, and redefinition. It is the kind of story that shifts public perception forever, not just of the people involved, but of the institution they once belonged to. As we journey through this seismic royal revelation, remember, history is not made only by coronations and jubilees. Sometimes, it's made in silence, in signatures, in decisions that shatter the illusion that blood alone is enough. The king has spoken, his son has fallen, and the crown will never be the same again. It didn't arrive in a flurry of press conferences or a leak to the media. There was no whisper of scandal before it hit. It came in the form of a sealed, ironclad royal decree signed in the name of the sovereign, authorized by the Privy Council, and delivered through the Royal Communications Office with language so terse, so definitive. It sent shockwaves rippling from Westminster to Windsor and across the globe. On an otherwise ordinary morning, the decree was quietly uploaded to the Crown's official record. It did not bear any unnecessary flourish. It didn't need to. The message was clear. Prince Henry Charles Albert David, Duke of Sussex, shall no longer hold claim to the rights, privileges, or place in the line of succession to the British throne. The language, although formal and regal, landed like a guillotine. The royal decree system is rarely used in modern Britain for personal familial matters. Most succession changes are handled naturally, by birth, death, or abdication. But this was unprecedented in the modern era. A monarch removing his own son from the royal succession was not merely an administrative update. It was an act of symbolic severance, an irreversible shift from kinship to institution. The process, according to those familiar with the inner workings of royal protocol, began weeks before the public ever learned of it. It started not with the king's pen, but with a convening of his inner legal advisors and constitutional experts. The Lord Chamberlain, the keeper of the Privy Seal, and several unnamed figures close to the king were reportedly present in an undisclosed meeting at Clarence House. Their task was not simple: determine whether the king had legal authority to bypass parliamentary process and unilaterally remove a member of the royal family from succession without a criminal conviction or abdication. The answer was yes, but barely. Because the line of succession is regulated through a hybrid framework of statutory law and royal prerogative, the monarch retains specific, though rarely invoked, powers to adjust internal succession designations through formal royal declaration. These are not arbitrary edicts. They must be advised, supported, and logged into the Crown archives. Once made public, they become constitutional fact. According to sources close to the legal advisors present during the drafting, the final document was not only signed by King Charles but witnessed by senior officers of the Crown. It was then reviewed by the legal teams at the Cabinet Office, not for approval, but for acknowledgement. Once the necessary witnesses had signed, the document became enforceable immediately. The language used was stark. Whereas the Duke of Sussex has, through a pattern of conduct and public discourse, brought harm and reputational injury to the Crown and to the dignity of its traditions and values. And whereas such conduct has rendered his continued place within the order of succession untenable and injurious to the unity of the realm, we, by our sovereign will, do hereby declare and command that the said Henry Charles Albert David, Duke of Sussex, be removed henceforth from the line of succession. The final clause included a note. This decree shall be entered into the record of the Crown and shall carry the weight of sovereign will unless repealed by further declaration or legislative act. What followed this announcement was silence, and not by accident. The Palace Communications team had prepared carefully for the rollout. A statement was drafted with the help of both constitutional and crisis PR experts. There would be no interviews, no press questions, only the royal declaration, published on the official royal website, sent to trusted media outlets via embargo, and posted in the Crown's public record. The choice of silence was deliberate. King Charles did not wish to fan flames. His goal, sources say, was clarity, not spectacle. He understood the gravity. He also knew the outrage it would provoke. But the king's closest allies, including Queen Camilla and Princess Anne, reportedly agreed with the move. They viewed it not as a punishment, but as a necessary final step to preserve the monarchy's integrity. According to insider reports, the decision was finalized after weeks of internal conflict. The king reportedly reviewed the last several years of public behavior by Harry, including the Oprah interview, the release of the memoir Spare, and the Netflix docuseries, in a single compiled dossier prepared by advisors. The report also included summaries of legal actions initiated or threatened by the Sussexes against various institutions of the Crown, including the Home Office over security detail decisions. A pivotal moment in this decision came in the form of a memo from within the Commonwealth Secretariat. Though confidential, the memo reportedly raised concerns that continued inclusion of Prince Harry in the line of succession was becoming a diplomatic issue in certain realms where the British monarch remains head of state. Australia, Canada, and several Caribbean nations had reportedly begun questioning the Crown structure as Harry and Meghan's public commentary intensified. This external pressure compounded the king's internal concerns. It was no longer about Harry the son. It was about Harry the figurehead, Harry the risk. The monarchy is built on image and institution. It can survive gossip. It cannot survive erosion from within. And so, with all mechanisms aligned, the king made his move. In the hours following the announcement, legal analysts swarmed the story. Some questioned the authority. Others clarified that while Parliament traditionally handles structural changes to the monarchy, the sovereign retains a unique and little-used power of personal discretion over family succession placements. In fact, this authority was last seen in 2012, when Queen Elizabeth II issued a letters patent altering succession rights for female heirs, ensuring Princess Charlotte would not be overtaken by Prince Louis despite his gender. But unlike that decision, which expanded inclusion, this one revoked it. And with that revocation, legal scholars began debating next steps. Could Harry challenge the decree in court? Could Parliament override the decision? The consensus was unanimous. He could not. Not directly. Because succession is not a civil right. It is a hereditary privilege overseen by sovereign will and historical precedent. The legal concept of non-justiciability protects such royal decisions from challenge in court. That means no appeal, no review. The only path to reversal would be another royal decree or a full act of Parliament. Both options, at present, are unlikely. What's even more complex is what this means for Archie and Lilibet. Though not named in the decree, their status is now a legal gray zone. As the children of a person no longer recognized in the line of succession, their future within the royal order is in flux. They retain their titles, for now, but their legitimacy as potential heirs is now under quiet but increasing scrutiny. The Archbishop of Canterbury was reportedly briefed in advance of the decision. Though his role is spiritual, he remains one of the monarchy's traditional counselors and played a central role in King Charles's coronation. Sources suggest he expressed concern about the spiritual implications of cutting off a son, but ultimately respected the king's sovereign authority. Internationally, the reaction was swift and polarizing. American media outlets expressed shock. British tabloids exploded. Political figures, while largely silent, began preparing statements in the event Parliament was asked to weigh in. Behind the scenes, the government, though uninvolved, is believed to have been notified days before the decree was made public. The moment the decree was published, Buckingham Palace updated its official website. The line of succession page, previously showing Prince Harry at number 5, now simply skipped to Prince Andrew's children. The edit was quiet, but immediate. And in Montecito, California, the Sussex household entered what insiders described as a media lockdown. Harry made no public statement. Meghan was not seen. Lawyers began consulting. Damage control had begun. But what damage control could reverse what had already been done? The royal decree is more than a document. It is the final word in a story that began with optimism and collapsed into bitterness. A father's decision, made not out of vengeance, but finality. A monarch choosing crown over blood. This is the moment history will remember. Not the tabloid headlines. Not the arguments. Not the palace drama. But the moment when a king, faced with a son who walked away, chose to close the door and turn the key. In the next section, we'll explore how things got this far. What broke the bond between Charles and Harry? What forced a father to choose the throne over reconciliation? And what was the last straw that finally pushed the king to act? Long before the decree, before the ink dried beneath the royal seal, before the world woke up to headlines declaring Prince Harry's removal from the line of succession, there was a slow, painful erosion. A gradual collapse of trust, of unity, and of something even deeper, the bond between father and son. The decision King Charles made was not born of a single explosive moment. It was the culmination of years marked by silence, humiliation, betrayal, and, perhaps most tragic of all, lost faith. To outsiders, it may seem abrupt, even vindictive, but to those within the royal orbit, it was inevitable. The only remaining question wasn't if it would happen, but when. And now, the when has come and gone. To fully grasp what drove King Charles to erase his son's future in the monarchy, we must trace the fissures that widened into fault lines, some public, others buried behind centuries-old palace walls. The public saw the aftermath. But inside Buckingham Palace, Clarence House, and Windsor Castle, the collapse unfolded in whispers, meetings, letters never sent, phone calls unanswered, and opportunities for reconciliation lost one by one. In the beginning, there was still hope. When Harry and Meghan announced their engagement in 2017, Charles reportedly offered not just approval but enthusiasm. He welcomed Meghan into the family, walked her down the aisle in place of her absent father, and publicly celebrated the diversity her presence brought to the monarchy. But even in those early days, cracks had begun to show. Behind the scenes, tensions were rising between Meghan and royal staff. Reports of clashing personalities, disagreements over protocol, and a culture clash between American individualism and British hierarchy began to swirl. Still, Charles held on. The monarchy had weathered worse, after all. But what he didn't foresee, or perhaps underestimated, was how quickly those cracks would be weaponized. When Harry and Meghan made the shocking announcement in January 2020 that they would step back from royal duties, the palace was blindsided. Charles was not informed beforehand. He found out through aides, who were alerted after the couple posted their decision on social media. For the king, then Prince of Wales, the move was more than just rebellion, it was betrayal. It bypassed not only protocol but familial respect. In the days after the Oprah broadcast, Charles reportedly went silent. Communications with Harry ceased. When asked by reporters if he had spoken to his son, he gave a rare public response, a weary, almost defeated. No, for a father who had once called Harry my darling boy, it was the most telling sign of all. But Charles didn't act, not yet. What followed was the publication of Harry's memoir, Spare. It was, by many accounts, the final insult. In the book, Harry laid bare years of private royal conversations, fights, and family dysfunction. He portrayed Charles as emotionally distant, occasionally cold, and often dismissive. The book recounted fights with William, resentment over Meghan's treatment, and grievances over his place within the family. But perhaps most painful to Charles were the revelations that cast doubt on his judgment and legacy, not as king, but as father. He had given Harry space. He had allowed him to tell his story. But Spare wasn't a story, it was an indictment. The Netflix documentary series that followed only deepened the wounds. In it, Harry and Meghan spoke candidly, and often critically, about the royal family. They suggested systemic failure, racism, and media collusion. They framed their departure not as a choice, but as a necessity for survival. And while Charles remained publicly silent, those close to him say it was the moment he realized reconciliation was no longer possible. By this point, the relationship was not just strained, it was broken. Yet what truly drove the king to act wasn't just the betrayal of words. It was the political and constitutional consequences that began to manifest. Behind closed doors, Commonwealth nations began expressing discomfort. The media storm surrounding the Sussexes was no longer a tabloid issue. It was affecting diplomatic relations. Australia's Republican movement gained momentum, citing the family drama as evidence of monarchy's irrelevance. In the Caribbean, officials renewed calls to remove the British monarch as head of state. What once were theoretical debates had become actionable campaigns. Charles was now not just a father, he was a monarch under fire. And his son had become, in effect, a liability to the crown. Sources say the decision to remove Harry from the line of succession was first suggested by a senior royal advisor who had tracked months of media coverage and internal polling. The data showed declining support for the monarchy among younger generations, particularly in the wake of Harry and Meghan's narrative. If Charles hoped to modernize the crown and retain relevance, he needed to make a statement, one that would draw a clear line between personal pain and institutional preservation. And so, with quiet calculation and heavy heart, Charles chose the crown. He reportedly consulted Queen Camilla, who supported the move. He spoke with Princess and whose loyalty to duty has never wavered. He confided in Prince William, who, by this point, had his own deep rift with Harry. The decision wasn't made in a vacuum. It was built on consensus. Painful, but necessary. There were other pressures too. Questions had begun to emerge about the validity of Harry and Meghan's children's claims to royal titles. Rumors circulated about birth certificates, legal procedures, and even possible citizenship issues. These weren't just gossip, they were constitutional landmines. And they made Harry's continued presence in the line of succession an open threat to the monarchy's long-term stability. So Charles acted. And now, the deed is done. The son who once held his hand in the public eye, who walked solemnly behind Princess Diana's casket, who stood beside his brother on countless royal tours, is no longer in the line to inherit the throne. This wasn't a decision made out of anger. It was a decision made out of exhaustion. Years of drama, headlines, accusations, and division had finally consumed whatever faith remained. The king had hoped his son would come home. Instead, he watched him burn the bridge, one interview at a time. In the next section, we turn the spotlight on the woman at the center of this royal firestorm, Meghan Markle. Was she a catalyst for liberation or destruction? How much of the decision was shaped by her influence? And did Charles truly believe she was the force that led his son away from the throne? To understand the unraveling of Prince Harry's place within the monarchy, one cannot avoid confronting the polarizing figure at the center of the storm, Meghan Markle. Actress, humanitarian, duchess, and to some within the palace walls, a disruptor who rewrote every rule, challenged every tradition, and ultimately set into motion one of the most seismic decisions in royal history. Her arrival in the royal fold was anything but ordinary. She was everything the institution wasn't used to: American, divorced, outspoken, media-savvy, and unafraid to redefine roles. Her background was in Hollywood, not heritage. Her style was expressive, not restrained. Her story wasn't about duty, it was about self-assertion. And in marrying Prince Harry, she brought with her not just a different energy, but an entirely new model of how royalty could operate outside the old constraints. At first, the narrative was triumphant. Meghan was celebrated for her humanitarian record, her confidence, and the modern flair she brought to the firm. Headlines spoke of a breath of fresh air. Her first public engagements were electric. Crowds adored her. Journalists applauded her poise and relatability. But behind the scenes, the culture shock was instant and irreversible. The royal family, as an institution, functions on hierarchy, deference, and containment. Meghan arrived with a sense of autonomy, a voice she refused to silence, and a belief that she could shape her own narrative within an institution that had, for centuries, written that narrative for others. That was the beginning of the internal friction. Early reports from royal aides pointed to clashes between Meghan and longtime staff members. There were allegations of abrupt demands, last-minute schedule changes, and a communication style that rankled those accustomed to the subtle cadence of royal protocol. Staffers began resigning. Aides spoke, anonymously at first, of bullying, though later investigations drew no formal conclusions. What mattered was the effect. It turned a private tension into a media firestorm. King Charles reportedly tried to mediate. He valued Meghan's intellect and modern appeal, but he also understood the risk of upsetting a finely balanced royal machinery. His efforts, however, were met with limited success. Meghan, according to palace insiders, believed the institution should evolve around her values, not the other way around. One critical moment that left deep scars was the lead-up to the royal wedding in 2018. Rumors of an emotional altercation between Meghan and Kate Middleton over bridesmaid dresses erupted in the press. Meghan later claimed in the Oprah interview that the story had been flipped, that it was she who had cried. This moment, small as it may seem, became emblematic of a deeper battle: who controls the narrative, and who is silenced in the process. From Charles's perspective, the issue wasn't Meghan's ambition or even her celebrity. It was her incompatibility with the crown's core principles: service above self, silence over spectacle, continuity over confrontation. But the greatest friction came not from Meghan's presence, but from her power over Harry. Those within royal circles speak of a transformation. Harry, once fiercely loyal to the firm despite his occasional rebellion, began to distance himself from family, friends, and long-standing obligations. His language shifted. His criticisms became more public. He stopped attending key events. Behind closed doors, it was clear Meghan was no longer just a duchess. She was Harry's center of gravity. This shift worried Charles profoundly. For years, he had navigated family turmoil with caution. He had endured public humiliation during the Diana Camilla years. He had worked to rehabilitate the monarchy's image. But with Harry and Meghan, he saw not just another scandal, but an existential threat. They weren't content to walk away quietly. They were determined to speak. Meghan's impact reached beyond the family dynamic. She redefined what it meant to be a royal spouse. She launched lawsuits against the British tabloids. She gave speeches about women's empowerment that carried pointed undertones. She challenged the media narrative not through palace channels, but through interviews, op-eds, and global platforms. She didn't wait for the press to spin the story, she told it herself. This approach put the palace in a bind. By breaking the fourth wall, Meghan violated the monarchy's unspoken pact with the public: never explain, never complain. Her candor made her a hero to many, but within the House of Windsor, it was interpreted as a breach of loyalty. King Charles, according to insiders, felt increasingly boxed in. If he spoke out against Meghan, he risked confirming the worst accusations. If he remained silent, the accusations stood unchallenged. And all the while, Harry stood by her side, defiant, protective, and increasingly alienated from his royal roots. The Oprah interview marked a major escalation. It wasn't just a personal airing of grievances, it was an indictment of the monarchy. Allegations of racism, mental health neglect, and deliberate abandonment were aimed squarely at the institution Charles was born to protect. While Meghan's accusations were made with sorrow, Harry's contributions had venom. And yet, the palace's official response was tepid. Recollections may vary. That line, carefully crafted, was intended to de-escalate. But Charles was not untouched. Meghan's framing of the firm as a cold, unfeeling machine resonated globally. Public sympathy swelled. And Charles, now facing a public relations nightmare, began to see the situation not just as a familial rift, but as a reputational collapse. In the weeks following the interview, internal discussions turned serious. Meghan had changed everything, not only by what she said, but by what she represented. She had transformed Harry from a discontented royal into a global advocate against the very monarchy that shaped him. And yet, it wasn't just what Meghan said, it was how she operated. Her deal-making with media companies, her carefully timed releases, and her image curation all struck senior royals as incompatible with royal service. Her partnership with Netflix, for example, was viewed as a red line, not because it was commercial, but because it traded on royal status while bypassing royal approval. Even Charles's coronation was affected. Debates raged behind the scenes about whether Meghan should be invited. Ultimately, she stayed in California, officially to care for the children. But few inside the palace believed that was the only reason. By this point, Charles had come to a private conclusion. Meghan and the monarchy could no longer coexist. And Harry, unwilling to choose his birth family over his wife, had effectively chosen for them both. Charles, unlike his mother, was not known for limitless patience. Elizabeth II had endured decades of scandal with stoic resolve. Charles, ascending to the throne late in life, had little appetite for prolonged drama. His decision to remove Harry from the line of succession was not about erasing a son. It was about protecting the future of the monarchy. And in that equation, Meghan represented a force too destabilizing to ignore. She had become the embodiment of the modern royal challenge: global fame without national allegiance, personal empowerment without institutional accountability. Meghan operated as a private citizen, but carried a title. She told her story as a victim, but retained the privileges of royalty. And in doing so, she reshaped Harry's identity, realigned his loyalties, and fundamentally altered the public's perception of the crown. For Charles, the calculus became unbearable. To retain Harry in the line of succession was to tether the crown to a narrative it could not control. A narrative of victimhood, grievance, and irreparable divide. So he made his choice. This was not a decision made out of animus toward Meghan. According to palace sources, Charles remains conflicted about her. He admires her intelligence. He respects her resilience. But he cannot reconcile her vision with the monarchy's mission. And in the end, the institution came first. In the next section, we examine how the rest of the royal family reacted to this decision. Was there jubilation, heartbreak, or uneasy silence? What did Prince William, Princess and Camilla really think? And how are the royals preparing for the storm that's still coming? The removal of Prince Harry from the line of succession did not merely shake public perception, it sent tremors through the highest echelons of the royal household. Inside the gilded halls of Buckingham Palace and the more secluded chambers of Windsor Castle, the royal family absorbed the news not as a breaking headline, but as a personal, private turning point. For some, it was a long-awaited resolution. For others, it was a quiet heartbreak. But for all, it was a defining moment that cemented the monarchy's decision to prioritize its future over the weight of familial obligation. The first to be informed, insiders say, was Prince William. As the direct heir and future king, William has grown accustomed to occupying the uncomfortable middle space between brother and crown. His relationship with Harry, once the tight bond of two boys weathering their mother's death together, has been reduced to curt exchanges and long-standing silence. The tension between the two has been well documented. The physical altercation described in Harry's memoir, the conflicting views on Meghan, and the slow-burning resentment over the pressures of royal life. William reportedly received the final draft of the decree 2 days before it was formally published. According to palace sources, he was not asked for approval, only for acknowledgement. His reaction, while not jubilant, was resolute. "He's been bracing for this," said one insider close to Kensington Palace. "He knew this day would come. He didn't fight it. He didn't encourage it. But he understood it." For William, the removal of Harry is not merely about family. It's about the burden of leadership. As the next in line, William has been increasingly involved in shaping the monarchy's future direction. He is acutely aware of the institution's vulnerabilities in the age of media saturation, public scrutiny, and generational shifts in loyalty. The more Harry and Meghan's narrative dominated headlines, the more difficult it became for the monarchy to maintain a unified voice. In private conversations, William reportedly expressed concern that keeping Harry in the line of succession risked creating a constitutional paradox, one in which a self-exiled royal could still be seen as a future head of state. That paradox has now been removed. But while William processed the news with royal pragmatism, other family members carried the weight differently. Princess and the ever-disciplined daughter of Queen Elizabeth, is said to have responded with quiet support. And, known for her no-nonsense approach and devotion to royal service, had long harbored skepticism about Harry and Meghan's direction. She viewed their desire for autonomy and media control as fundamentally at odds with the concept of monarchy as a lifelong duty. Behind the scenes, she had been one of the few senior royals urging Charles to draw a clear line. When the decision came, she expressed neither joy nor sadness, only relief. She believed this should have happened sooner, said a retired royal aide. For her, monarchy isn't about sentiment. It's about service. And if someone walks away from that, they walk away from the line as well. Then there was Queen Camilla. Publicly restrained, privately influential, Camilla's relationship with Harry has always been delicate. Harry's memoir Spare painted her in an unflattering light, referring to her as dangerous and accusing her of trading stories to the press in exchange for better coverage. The accusation was not only personally wounding, it carried political risk. Camilla, once a deeply controversial figure, had only recently cemented her place as queen consort after years of public skepticism. Harry's words risked reigniting old fires. According to individuals close to Clarence House, Camilla never demanded action against Harry, but she didn't object to it either. Her view, it is said, was that the crown must not allow bitterness to undermine dignity. In her view, Charles had tried. He had waited. He had reached out. And when those efforts were thrown back with accusations and exposés, he had no choice but to act. One source described Camilla's reaction as emotionally complex. She reportedly expressed sadness that it had come to this, but also emphasized that the firm comes first. Like him, she is not sentimental about the monarchy. She survived decades of scorn to stand beside Charles as queen. Her loyalty is to the throne, not to fractured family bonds. But perhaps the most telling silence came from Prince Andrew. While no one would dare draw comparisons between the scandal-ridden Duke of York and Prince Harry's situation, the juxtaposition is unavoidable. Andrew, disgraced by association with Jeffrey Epstein and forced to step back from public duties, has never been formally removed from the line of succession. He remains in the royal order, albeit without any functioning role. That Harry, who broke with protocol in the family but not the law, would be formally stripped while Andrew remains untouched, has triggered quiet murmurs within royal and political circles. Privately, Andrew is said to be rattled by the move. He understands its implications. If the king is willing to take this step with his own son, then no one is immune. His own place, once protected by inertia, may now be seen as vulnerable. This could mark the beginning of a broader pruning of the royal tree. Within the younger generation, reactions varied. Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie, known to be friendlier with Harry and Meghan than other royals, have reportedly remained silent. Eugenie, in particular, had visited Harry in the United States and was seen as a potential bridge between the factions. But since the decree, she has kept her distance, publicly and privately. Whether out of loyalty to the crown or self-preservation, the message is clear: the family is closing ranks. For King Charles himself, the days following the decision have been shrouded in isolation. Those close to him describe a man both burdened and unburdened. He did not make the choice lightly. But once it was made, he committed to it completely. Reports suggest he has declined to speak to Harry directly since the announcement. There has been no call, no letter, just silence. One aide described the mood inside the palace as somber but steady. The atmosphere is not celebratory. There are no toasts being raised. No one is rejoicing. Instead, there is a recognition that something irrevocable has happened. A door has been closed, and behind it, a son is standing on the outside. The Queen's legacy looms large over this moment. Queen Elizabeth II embodied reconciliation. She endured the abdication of her uncle, the divorces of her children, and the scandals of her grandchildren with an unwavering commitment to preservation over punishment. But Charles is not his mother. His reign is about modernization, definition, and legacy building. In his mind, clarity must replace chaos. And that meant removing ambiguity, even when it came at the cost of blood. The wider royal household, those who serve in private roles, assist with protocol, and manage ceremonial functions, have quietly applauded the decision. To them, the years of uncertainty created by Harry's half-in, half-out status had become exhausting. Invitations had to be recalibrated. Press statements hedged. Events shadowed by speculation. Now, at least, they say, there is finality. Still, the emotional undercurrent remains. Harry was not just a prince, he was family. The boy who made them laugh, who brought energy into formal gatherings, who once charmed the public with his vulnerability and mischief. The absence of that boy is felt, even as the consequences of the man he became are being managed. There are no official family gatherings planned in the near future. No joint holidays. No reconciliatory retreats. The schedule has been cleared to allow the firestorm to pass. The palace understands media cycles. They know the world will move on. But the fracture within their own walls will not heal so quickly. In the next section, we move from the emotional to the legal. What exactly does this removal mean in constitutional terms? Can Harry contest it? What are the legal grounds? And what does the history of British succession law say about such unprecedented action? In the centuries-long history of the British monarchy, the idea of stripping a royal of succession rights is not just uncommon, it borders on unthinkable. The line of succession is not a ceremonial list. It is a framework enshrined in law, cemented through acts of parliament, centuries of precedent, and a finely balanced interplay between hereditary privilege and constitutional order. It defines who may one day occupy the throne, and it sets the legal ground beneath the institution itself. So when King Charles moved to remove his son Prince Harry from this royal ledger, it triggered a legal and constitutional chain reaction that had no recent precedent. The question that followed was not only one of morality or emotion, it was now one of legality. Could the king truly do this? Was it lawful? Was it final? And what might it mean for the future of the monarchy itself? To answer these questions, we must start by understanding how the line of succession is governed in the United Kingdom. The current rules are largely shaped by three foundational legal instruments: the Bill of Rights 1689, the Act of Settlement 1701, and the Succession to the Crown Act 2013. These documents, collectively, lay out the conditions by which someone is eligible to ascend the British throne. They address matters of religion, legitimacy, gender, and hereditary right, but they say nothing about personal behavior, political affiliation, or modern scandal. Importantly, these laws do not automatically grant a monarch unilateral power to change the succession. The monarch does not rule by divine decree. Britain is a constitutional monarchy, where the sovereign reigns but does not govern. Most changes to the line of succession in modern history have required acts of parliament, not just a royal signature. So how, then, could Charles remove his son? The answer lies in the complex and often misunderstood tool known as the royal prerogative. The royal prerogative refers to the discretionary powers that remain vested in the crown. While most of these powers are exercised by government ministers on the monarch's behalf, there are a few that remain within the sovereign's personal control, particularly regarding the internal structure of the royal household. Among them is the issuing of royal letters patent and royal decrees, which can define styles, titles, and official roles within the monarchy. In this case, Charles did not attempt to alter statutory succession law through Parliament. Instead, he acted within his prerogative to define who is considered active or recognized within the royal structure. The decree removing Harry did not attempt to erase the statutory fact of Harry's birth or his place as the king's son. Rather, it exercised the sovereign's right to determine who shall be granted the privileges, styles, and functional recognition associated with the monarchy. In other words, Harry was removed from the practical line of succession, even if his biological place remains recorded by history. This distinction matters. Technically, unless Parliament passes an act to amend the succession laws, Harry's name may still be included in official genealogical charts. But for all intents and purposes, titles, official roles, ceremonial rights, and constitutional precedents, he has been stripped. This soft removal is functionally absolute. No security clearance. No access to royal documents. No inclusion in state protocols. Can he challenge this? In theory, no. The courts in the United Kingdom generally consider matters of royal succession to be non-justiciable, meaning they fall outside the jurisdiction of judicial review. The doctrine of separation between crown and court protects royal prerogative in matters of lineage. Harry cannot sue to be reinstated, nor can he appeal to a tribunal. He has no legal standing to force the king to recognize him as a working royal or successor. The monarchy is not a democracy. It does not promise fairness in the modern, legalistic sense. It operates within its own constitutional silo. But there's another layer. Because Harry and Meghan reside in the United States, and their children were born there, questions of dual citizenship and constitutional conflict have arisen. Specifically, what rights, if any, do American-born royal children have to succession under British law? The answer, again, is complicated. British nationality law allows for the transmission of citizenship by descent. Archie and Lilibet are, by birth, dual citizens of the US and the UK. Under current rules, this does not disqualify them from the line of succession. However, succession to the throne still requires allegiance to the United Kingdom, and the monarch must reside in the country to perform their constitutional role. In practical terms, this means that even if Harry's children retain their theoretical place in the line, their pathway to the throne would be fraught with legal, logistical, and diplomatic obstacles. Additionally, some constitutional scholars have pointed to an ambiguity. If Harry has been stripped of official succession status through royal decree, what becomes of his children's position? Succession in the British monarchy follows primogeniture, but also recognizes legitimacy through recognized marriages. If the parent is no longer recognized within the royal structure, the children's placement becomes increasingly tenuous. This legal uncertainty has opened the door to calls for reform. Since the decree was made public, some members of Parliament and legal scholars have begun discussing the need to modernize succession law to reflect the challenges posed by modern life, globalization, dual citizenship, surrogacy, and personal autonomy. One proposal gaining quiet support is the establishment of a formal vetting mechanism for future heirs, including verification of birth records, citizenship, and loyalty to the crown. Another proposes establishing a ceremonial council of succession, which would include the sovereign, senior royals, legal advisors, and parliament members who could vote on the removal or confirmation of successors under extraordinary circumstances. Whether such proposals gain traction remains to be seen. But the legal vacuum surrounding Harry's removal is already being tested in the court of public opinion, and that, too, carries weight. Meanwhile, international legal implications also exist. The British monarch is still head of state in 14 other countries, including Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. Each has its own legal interpretation of the monarchy. Some legal analysts argue that if Harry were to challenge his removal, he could theoretically do so in one of these jurisdictions by citing a constitutional conflict. But such a move would be symbolic at best and devastatingly unpopular at worst. No Commonwealth nation wants to be the backdrop for a royal family lawsuit. Back in the UK, the Crown Prosecution Service has remained silent. The Home Office, responsible for security and immigration, has made no public statement. And Buckingham Palace continues to maintain that the decree is a sovereign matter, declining to elaborate further. For Harry, the legal door is closed. But the ramifications are permanent. He is no longer entitled to represent the monarchy abroad or at home. He cannot be called upon to serve as Counselor of State, a role reserved for those in the line of succession. He loses precedence in all official ceremonies. In diplomatic terms, he is a private citizen. And with this comes a cascade of consequences. His children, without active titles or royal engagement, are unlikely to be invited to participate in future royal events. Their use of prince and princess may remain nominal, but their position within the institution is now ambiguous. If future constitutional questions arise about coronation oaths, regency appointments, or dynastic succession, Harry and his descendants will no longer be part of the conversation. This is the legal reality Charles has created, a surgical removal, done through tradition, cloaked in legality, and immune to appeal. Some critics have warned that the precedent could be dangerous. What if future monarchs begin stripping relatives for political reasons? What happens when royal disputes become dynastic battles disguised as legal acts? Others argue that the monarchy, if it is to survive in the 21st century, must be able to define itself, not merely through blood, but through loyalty and action. What Charles has done may not be common, but it is legally sound. And in doing so, he has reasserted the sovereign's right to control not just the monarchy's image, but its future. In the next section, we examine how this decision played out on the streets, in the press, and across social media. What does the British public think of Harry's removal? Has the monarchy strengthened its position or shattered the last vestige of royal unity? When news broke that King Charles had officially removed Prince Harry from the line of succession, the reactions across the United Kingdom were not uniform. They were explosive, emotional, divisive. In living rooms, parliament corridors, media outlets, and online forums, the nation ignited. For some, the king's decision represented strength and moral clarity. For others, it was an unforgivable abandonment of a son, a brother, a once-beloved prince who had lost his way. No single moment in recent royal history, not even Megxit, had fractured public sentiment so completely. In the immediate aftermath, tabloid headlines blared phrases like "King draws final line," "Harry cast out," and "Monarchy purges the rebel prince." For publications like the Daily Mail, The Sun, and The Express, the decision was framed as Charles restoring discipline to an increasingly unruly institution. Editorials praised the king for putting duty before dynasty and making the monarchy fit for the modern era. One commentator on GB News boldly declared, "The king did what the queen never could." He made it clear that the crown isn't a sentimental playground, it's a symbol of order. If Harry couldn't live by that, then he had to go. Across the right-wing media spectrum, there was a sense of vindication. Many who had long criticized Harry for airing dirty laundry, monetizing his royal status, and whining from a Montecito mansion welcomed the move as overdue. Callers on LBC Radio praised the decision as decisive leadership and a moment of reckoning. But elsewhere, the mood was starkly different. Among younger audiences, especially those engaged through social media platforms like TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram, the reaction was more emotional, more conflicted, and often openly critical of the monarchy. Hashtags like #JusticeForHarry, #AbolishTheMonarchy, and #KingOfCold trended within hours. Influencers and commentators with large youth followings dissected the news through a personal lens. Themes of abandonment, toxic families, and the price of speaking out were discussed with urgency. "I can't believe a father would do this to his own son," read one viral tweet with over 100,000 likes. "Charles has chosen the institution over his child. That's not leadership. That's cowardice." Popular culture figures weighed in, too. British celebrities and political commentators split along ideological lines. Piers Morgan, predictably, lauded the decision, saying, "At last, the king has rid the crown of its biggest liability." Meanwhile, others like author Caitlin Moran and actor Daniel Radcliffe hinted at broader unease with a monarchy that punishes internal dissent while remaining quiet about scandal-prone figures like Prince Andrew. In regional Britain, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, the response was complicated by broader political tensions. For independence-minded Scots, especially those sympathetic to Republican ideals, Harry's removal sparked fresh debate about the relevance of the monarchy itself. The Scottish National Party issued a measured statement, but noted the growing disconnect between the royal family and modern democratic values. Polling out of Glasgow showed a sharp generational divide. Only 21% of people under 35 supported Charles's decision, while 58% over the age of 55 approved. Meanwhile, in Northern Ireland, where royal sentiment is politically charged and deeply intertwined with historical grievances, the reaction was muted but observant. Community leaders from both sides of the divide saw the move not as a family drama, but as a sign of a monarchy once again embroiled in distraction and division. In London, opinions varied as widely as the city's cultural mosaic. In affluent boroughs like Kensington and Chelsea, many older residents voiced approval, citing tradition and institutional strength. But in more progressive areas like Hackney and Brixton, where anti-monarchist sentiment has grown, voices emerged in defense of Harry's right to forge his own path. And then there was the public square, interviews with everyday Britons, conducted by national broadcasters and independent channels alike. In Manchester, a pensioner named Thomas said, "Harry brought this on himself. You can't spit on the family crest and expect to be welcomed back." The king had no choice. In Birmingham, a young mother named Nyla responded differently. "Harry never chose this life. He was born into it. He tried to speak up and was punished for it. That's not justice, that's control." Public polling conducted in the days following the announcement revealed the country pulled in opposing directions. A YouGov poll showed that 49% of Britons supported Charles's decision, 27% opposed it, and 24% were undecided or indifferent. The numbers revealed sharp generational and regional divides. Among Britons over 60, support for the decision rose to 65%. Among those aged 18 to 30, support plummeted to 18%, with a majority expressing sympathy for Harry. The monarchy, always a mirror of national sentiment, now faced a new reflection, a deeply polarized population. For decades, the Windsors have weathered scandals through silence and unity. But Harry's removal challenged both of those pillars. It forced the monarchy to act openly, and the public to choose sides. Abroad, the decision was equally seismic. In the United States, where Harry and Meghan have rebuilt their brand, the media reaction was swift and dramatic. American news outlets framed the story through a distinctly emotional lens. "Exiled by his father," read the headline on CNN.com. The New York Times posed the question, what does family loyalty mean when the crown is involved? In California, the mood was one of outrage. Prominent liberal voices, many of whom had embraced Meghan and Harry as truth-tellers and advocates, condemned Charles's decision. Social justice figures compared the action to authoritarian suppression. Oprah Winfrey, though silent officially, was reportedly deeply saddened by the outcome. Even mainstream daytime programs like The View and Good Morning America weighed in, with hosts debating whether Harry's removal signaled a monarchy too steeped in cold tradition to adapt to the modern world. But not all of America was sympathetic. Conservative commentators, especially those skeptical of celebrity activism, sided with Charles. "You can't attack your family on Netflix and expect a Christmas card," joked one Fox News host. Charles didn't exile his son. Harry exiled himself. The global impact continued to ripple. In Canada and Australia, countries where the British monarch remains head of state, the announcement revived dormant debates about republicanism. In Sydney, a national debate program aired a segment titled, "Should This Be Our Head of State?" featuring young voters questioning the monarchy's relevance in a world where a prince could be erased with a pen stroke. In Canada, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau avoided direct comment but was pressed in a press briefing on whether the country would consider revisiting its constitutional ties to the crown. The question, though sidestepped, now hangs in the air. At the heart of this global storm is one inescapable truth: the monarchy is no longer a private affair. Its actions are scrutinized not only by traditionalists but by global citizens, digital commentators, and a generation raised on transparency and choice. King Charles's decision was meant to provide clarity. Instead, it has triggered a broader reckoning, one that touches on the role of family, the limits of tradition, and the moral expectations placed on an institution once insulated from consequence. Perhaps the most profound reactions have come from those with no political agenda, no generational allegiance, just a sense of human empathy. A father removed his son from a royal order. A son was cast out of the family business. Whether deserved or not, it felt deeply personal to people who know what estrangement feels like. In cafes, at bus stops, and in offices, Britons asked themselves, could I do that to my child? And in that question, the monarchy's mystery became mortal. In the next section, we turn to the Sussex brand. How has this decision impacted Harry and Meghan's financial empire, their global standing, and their future as cultural influencers? Have they become underdogs or fallen stars? When Prince Harry and Meghan Markle stepped away from royal duties in 2020, they didn't simply retreat into private life. They rebranded. They transitioned from senior royals to global figures, from tradition-bound public servants to self-styled entrepreneurs, advocates, and media moguls. Their narrative was clear. They weren't abandoning responsibility. They were redefining it. Archewell, their foundation, would channel their humanitarian spirit. Their media deals with Netflix and Spotify would provide a new platform to uplift and unite. They would tell stories, control their image, and reshape their legacy. For a while, it worked. After Megxit, their stock rose exponentially, especially in the United States. Meghan's interview with Oprah Winfrey went viral, reaching tens of millions globally. Harry's memoir Spare became an instant bestseller. Their Netflix docuseries broke viewership records. They signed massive deals, reportedly over $100 million with Netflix, $25 million with Spotify, and more in private media partnerships and public speaking circuits. They were no longer just royals. They were a brand, Sussex Inc. But the power of a brand relies on its core promise. For Harry and Meghan, that promise was authenticity, victimhood, moral clarity, and emotional truth. They positioned themselves as brave whistleblowers, cast aside by a cold institution, finding light and justice in their independence. Their struggles became content. Their content became currency. And their currency flowed through audience sympathy. Now, with King Charles's official removal of Prince Harry from the line of succession, that brand is under siege. Not because of public opinion alone, but because the foundational mythology that sustained it has started to crack. The royal decree sent a signal not just to constitutional scholars, but to Hollywood studios, corporate sponsors, and brand strategists. This story is no longer evolving, it's closing. The suspense is gone. The conflict has reached its final act. And what remains is not a revolutionary journey, but a family feud that has now ended in formal exile. One high-ranking executive at a media company in Los Angeles summed it up bluntly. There's no next chapter now. The arc is over. You can't market yourself as the royal outcast if the royal family no longer even acknowledges your existence. Industry insiders began to quietly pull back almost immediately after the news broke. Brands that had partnered with Archewell on initiatives, ranging from mental health to gender equality, started re-evaluating their risk profile. Would association with the Sussexes continue to attract progressive, loyal audiences? Or would it now appear as if they were backing a pair who had burned every bridge behind them? Reputation consultants were quick to weigh in. One veteran crisis PR manager noted, their story has always been their product. But once that story stops being dynamic, once it loses sympathy, it becomes repetition. And repetition kills trust. The data confirms this trend. Recent social media analytics show a steep drop in positive sentiment around Harry and Meghan's profiles following the succession removal. On Instagram, their posts have seen declining engagement. On YouTube and Twitter, criticism has increased. Previously supportive influencers and media personalities have begun to distance themselves or go silent entirely. One particularly damaging shift occurred in media coverage. For months, Harry and Meghan had enjoyed favorable treatment from American outlets, especially those sympathetic to liberal causes. But as the weight of their narrative grew heavier with each media appearance, even their supporters began to express fatigue. The question kept resurfacing. How long can two people who rejected royalty continue to define themselves through their royal past? The king's decision forced that question into stark relief. It severed the thread that allowed Harry and Meghan to stay connected to their origin story. Without that thread, they now face the challenge of reinventing themselves yet again, this time without the luxury of referencing their former titles or exploiting royal insider status. Their speeches can no longer hint at succession. Their memoirs can no longer tease proximity to the throne. They are, by royal decree, officially outside the institution they built their fame critiquing. This change could have commercial implications. Netflix executives are reportedly reviewing their content roadmap with the Sussexes. The couple's original deal was broad, promising documentaries, scripted series, children's content, and cultural programming. But so far, the standout product has been the docuseries that revisited their royal exit, relying heavily on footage, commentary, and emotional reflection related to Harry's family. Future projects may struggle without that access. Industry speculation suggests that internal discussions are underway about shifting expectations, moving from royal-themed narratives to more generalized lifestyle or advocacy content. But that shift brings risk. Without the royal hook, do they hold the same appeal? Spotify, which previously terminated its deal with the couple after a single podcast season, cited a lack of deliverables and content consistency. That was before Harry's removal from Succession. With this new development, industry analysts believe other companies may grow wary of long-term partnerships, fearing instability or diminishing cultural cachet. Meanwhile, the speaking circuit, once a lucrative source of income, may begin to dry up as well. Harry and Meghan's appearances were often booked under the premise of global recognition and insight into the inner workings of monarchy, media, and personal reinvention. Now, stripped of their royal proximity, their draw could be diminished. Without the tension of an unresolved rift or the allure of potential reconciliation, their story risks appearing static. Perhaps the most critical concern, however, is their charitable arm, Archewell Foundation. Philanthropy thrives on public trust, corporate sponsorship, and media momentum. But as questions rise about the couple's ongoing relevance, so too does scrutiny over the foundation's transparency and impact. Reports have already surfaced of scaled-back operations, high staff turnover, and questions around measurable outcomes. The foundation is still active, but its future is tied to the couple's brand strength. If that strength continues to erode, so does Archewell's influence. And yet, not all is lost. There remains a fiercely loyal core of supporters, especially in the United States and among progressive circles,